Well, here we go for the second of today's remote sessions. I suspect it's going to be a quiet one because, like, realistically, the final year sessions are usually quiet ones. So I'm not going to be especially caught up if there's not an enormous turnout. We did a session this morning with the third years. I think Tim got a bunch of the second years on board as well. Excuse me, little clue as to why we're remote today. And we had a real good run through. We're going to be going through a few, wait a sec, it's just me talking. Let me just, look, I've got a very sophisticated setup. Look at that, nice transition and everything. We're going to be going through some techniques in Photoshop that I think we maybe have covered a little bit before, but it's sort of an approach where we're going to use a few sort of visual tricks to create something that looks quite complete. With a goal for, as with most of the stuff that I do, it being super fast and extremely effective, extremely efficient. So I think we've mentioned, I don't know if you've got an email that's been sent out to you, but the goal for these remote sessions is for them to, hold on 1 second, let me just click on this, it's going to get on my nerves otherwise. For us to be able to have sort of an interactive session where I can go through a bunch of the different techniques, much like if I was on site at the university, demonstrate everything to you. We'll do it step by step, so hopefully you guys will be able to follow along at home, but then also you'll be able to communicate with me using either the YouTube chat or the Discord. Now, I've got a link that's on the finalists Facebook page, so the Facebook group that the university uses to communicate stuff to you every now and again. There's a link that I posted on there, which is an invite to the Discord group. Discord is an in-browser chat solution that we're going to be able to use. We use it this morning. The reason for doing this is that it gives us a second tier rather than just using the YouTube chat. I'm pointing there because that's where my screen is. And there's a few extra features that it has that we can't do on the YouTube chat. YouTube chat is fine. You guys, if you have any questions or anything throughout the whole process, if you're not on Discord, then you'll be able to ask on there. And because this is a live rather than just being a pre-record, then I can answer them live, pause what we're doing and explain. If you're using the Discord though, then you can send screenshots to me of whatever it is that you're working on that's giving you jip if there's a problem with it. Similarly, if you get completely stuck, then what you'll be able to do is to call me using the Discord, and then you can screen share to me, which is a really nice feature that we'll be able to use. So you can actually show me what you're looking at on screen. So if it's a complete car crash and you can't quite get it to work, then that's where it is. Now, the way that I recommend that you guys follow along with this is, I know a few people this morning were going through, they were just watching, making notes so that they can proceed at their own pace. But the goal is for you to be able to specifically follow along. So whilst I'm doing this, you'll be able to follow along simultaneously. And the best way to do this is if you use YouTube on your second screen. So if you prop your phone up, or if you have a tablet that you'll be able to use, you can use your phone or tablet to view this YouTube feed. So you can see the YouTube feed over here, and then on your main screen, you'll be able to have Photoshop running. You'll be able to walk through along with me in time with the process that we're going to go through today. So very similar to the sessions that we do in class, where we're in the Graham Sutherland building and I've got the screen and you guys can follow along on your computers there, except instead of me being up on the screen there, we'll be down on your little screen just here. So let me just switch this back over. So if you guys can get into that space, what I want you to do is to, like I said, YouTube on your second screen, Photoshop on your PC. If you open Discord in your browser in Chrome or Safari, whatever, and have that running behind Photoshop, that will be ideal. We're going to be going through something where we'll be able to use a few sort of new tricks in Photoshop. So I appreciate that you guys in the final year have got absolutely shed loads of stuff running at the moment. You've got a load of different projects, well, not a load of different projects, you amongst you have different projects, but you've got one key important project. So in parallel to running these sessions, I'm still accessible if you have any immediate technical queries in Photoshop, InDesign or Illustrator via my email address, which I think most of you have got. If you've not, I'll make sure that it's on the Product Design Finalists Facebook group. And the Discord as well. So if you join the Discord, it's more immediate, so as it functions like a chat program. If you message me on that, it pops up on my phone, so whatever I'm doing, I usually will be able to jump in and quite quickly give you some kind of support with that. So that said, let's get going in Photoshop. 5 viewers, huge. If you're on YouTube, do me a favor, just check in on the chat, just so that we can say hi and make sure that we can see that there's a few people doing it. So let me just get into your Photoshop. Before we get started, we're actually going to be working on designing and rendering a frame for a bike. So we're going to be just going to Bing. Let me open this window up. Bing.com. Now, if you're looking for images, so obviously everyone's familiar with using Google Images. On that block. There are certain features of Bing Images that make it more suitable for looking for the kind of images that we need. So obviously you search and you get the results like this. What Bing Images lets you do, you probably won't have this. If you click on this button at the top that says Filter, you get some extra drop downs just here, which allow you to select certain things like whether you want a photograph or illustration, what kind of layout it's going to be, wide or tall. And importantly, for what we're going to do, I'm going to select extra large in the image size on the left hand side. We're going to be using the photograph of a road bike, a cycle, as kind of like an underdrawing, so that we can use that as reference. We're only going to be designing the frame, so we don't need to spend ages designing and drawing all of the rest of the stuff. So this is going to make life nice and easy. But of course, we want to make sure that we've got as high a resolution as possible, so that everything that's coming into Photoshop is going to look nice and crisp and clear, and it's going to be very lovely. So I'm just going to find one which has got a good size resolution. The other feature, Google doesn't necessarily let you do this in the same way in terms of the size. It will let you specify certain different sizes, but it doesn't pull in extra high resolution images like this. And the other thing that it doesn't do is it doesn't give you a specification for what the resolution for each image is. Whereas Bing puts a little label over everything, and each one of these images has got a just a number that tells us what the resolution for that image in particular is. So if we look at this one just here, we've got this really beautiful high resolution image. And if I load that up, I can see, yep, that's looking pretty good for what I want it for. So we just see if there's anything else that pops up that I think is going to be suitable as well. That one's a little bit blurry actually, weirdly. Let me just get rid of that, don't want that. So I'm looking for one that's sort of isolated against the white background, because that's going to be the best for us to work with. Sorry, I've become a ginormous fussbot. It's not necessary to spend this long trying to find the exact right perfect one, but I'm doing it anyway. That one will do. Right, so I'm going to copy that, go directly to Photoshop and click File, New. Now, in addition to all of the normal file sizes that Photoshop's going to give you, you can select print and pick down from sort of all of the different ISO page sizes, A4, A3, A5, things like that. And then there's all the web standardized sizes, like 1080 by 1920. But if you go to recent, the very first one that it gives you, if you've got something sort of nice high resolution that's been copied onto the clipboard, it gives you a file size that is the exact size of whatever you've copied onto the clipboard. So I'm going to click on clipboard. You can see this is the size of the image that I just copied. I'm going to click create. So it gives us the page, click Control V, and we're going to paste in our image. So the bike looks great, and like I said, it's pretty sharp. It's got plenty of detail on it that we're going to be able to use for creating our artwork. I'm just going to rename this layer bike BG for the bike. I kind of want a little bit of extra space around the outside of the page. So the bike is right up against the side just here. So what I'm going to do is click Image, Canvas Size. Now importantly, I'm not going to click Image Size. If I clicked Image Size and resized, then what it would do is it would scale the image inside the document. Whereas if I click Canvas Size and change the size, it doesn't change the pixel size of the image, it just adds extra space around the outside of it. Let me just click on that. So I'm going to set it to 2300 1504, so that adds 100 pixels around each side. I'm going to put the origin, could be in any one of the corners or in the center. I want it to be in the center so that the image is going to stay centered on the page. Click OK, make a new layer underneath this one. Fill it with white, making sure that white is the foreground color. Alt backspace on the keyboard, flood fills the whole artboard with white. Then I'm going to click Control E and flatten that down. Rename that layer again, let's get on my nerves. We've got a couple of people checked in. Tyrone, thanks for coming along. And Charlie in Toronto. What time is it in Toronto? Hope you're not up too early. Yeah, too early, that would be it. So we've got the bike here and we've got it on a layer. I'm going to make a new layer on top, which is going to be called Frame. And I'm going to make sure that we've got heavens above. I'm going to make sure that we've got our paths window open down here. Sorry, I was just faffing about just there. Often when you open Photoshop up, the default is going to be that you'll have the layers, channels and paths all nested together. So when you're working in Photoshop, you want to make sure that the art space, the area you're working in, is going to be as organized as possible for what you're going to be doing with it. So because we're going to be working with a pen tool, we're going to be working with paths at the same time as we're going to be working with layers. I don't want to have the paths behind the layers like this. So you can see just here we've got paths, channels and layers. I want to separate them out so I can see them simultaneously. So I'm going to grab the paths and drag it down to the bottom. As you drag it to the bottom, you'll see that like this blue line appears, and that means that it's going to nest that little panel at the bottom underneath layers. So we've got layers and paths. Now because we're going to be working with a pen tool in the paths, if you just start working with a pen tool, it will create a work path, which is kind of transient. So when you've finished using it, close it, sometimes open it back up and it will be gone because it's just a sort of a temporary template kind of thing. Whereas I want to have one that I'll be able to keep and reference again and again. So I'm going to click on the new path just here. I'm going to rename this path Frame. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of imagine like a nice, smooth, organic frame, and it's going to match the hard points on the bike already. So for example, there's certain points where the sort of normal sort of biometrics of the bike, the shape of it, fit the way that people ride. So the way that the seat stem comes down just here is going to be a fixed point. The way that the handlebar column comes down here, that's going to be a fixed point. And the rear wheel point here and the gear just here. So obviously sometimes you might be going to redesign these, but if you're just doing a frame, just for today, we're going to keep those all the same. So I'm going to click P on the keyboard. Remember, P on the keyboard selects the pen tool. We're going to just start clicking here. So when you're working with a pen, we're going to make sure that this is really, really smooth. I kind of want to have this really heightened smoothness of the shape. When you're working with a pen, if you want it to be nice and smooth, your goal is to use kind of as few a number of points as possible. So if you click and drag, you're going to get the Bezier curve handles come out from the pen, from the anchor points. So I'm not tracing the outside of this frame, but I am kind of like drawing a new frame that's going to take its place. And of course I can change to using the selection tool, which is A on the keyboard or Shift A. So these are the path selection tool and direct selection tool. And we're just going to draw the outline of the frame like this. So we've got this sort of very curvy organic frame. We're working on the same layer. I'm just going to draw in some holes inside that. Again, trying to keep to this very sort of organic look. Now, if you were for reals designing a frame like this, obviously you wouldn't be actually doing the design process like this probably. Almost certainly you would have done some sketching and worked out the shape of it, so you would just be using this process to create it in Photoshop. But just for today, I'm going to work directly into Photoshop like this. So our frame looks something like this. Now, you'll notice from the thumbnail from the frame just here that it's all white around the outside and then sort of grey for the actual thumbnail. What I want is for the counters, for the holes inside the frame to be white here. So I need to make sure from this little thing at the top here, for the path operators, that I've got exclude overlapping shapes. So now what happens if I select grey, sort of a 50% grey from my HSB slider up here in the colour window, saturation at 0 still. Make sure I'm on the frame layer, frame selected, grey around the outside, white with the holes cut through here. When I click on this button at the bottom of the paths thing, it's going to fill those paths with my foreground colour. So I've got this frame which looks kind of like weird, but it's pretty much the shape that I want it to be. Actually, I'm just going to undo that because I want to make a change to it. That's a bit better. Excuse me. Wonderful. It's great, great sign. So we've got this nice shape for the frame. Happy with that. I'm actually going to make a new layer underneath that, fill that with white, duplicate the frame, what I'm going to do now is, so we're going to do a process later on which is going to let us distort a texture that we're going to put over this frame. So we have to set something up now so that when we come back round to it, this is going to work. We're going to be able to do it. So what we're going to do is, on the frame, either the copy or the original, I'm going to go down to FX at the bottom of the layer panel, and I'm going to click on Inner Shadow. Now, you get this little window is going to pop up, and depending on how it's set up on your machine, it's likely that you're going to have an offset shadow like this. So this is how you make it look like something there's like a hole in a surface and you've filled the hole inside. I don't want that. I want to make sure that distance is set to 0. I'm going to make sure that opacity is set to 100. And I'm going to adjust the size so that the majority of these bars, it goes kind of from black to the middle where it's going to be the midpoint grey and then down again. So I can adjust the size so it's either way too big or way too small. I'm just going to go somewhere around about there, if that makes sense. Charlie's just asked on the YouTube, he said, been cruising YouTube and found your page. Terrific instruction. Thank you very much. Normally this is a session that would actually be done live at the product design course at Coventry University in Coventry in the West Midlands in the UK, but I've kind of decided that today we're going to start doing some remote instructions for reasons you can probably imagine. You've just asked, hope this is recorded as I would like to watch it again. The way that this is going to work is that the YouTube lives are usually going to be recorded. The default setting in YouTube is that it retains the thing. So actually there is a very similar session where we went through everything earlier today already recorded on there. But yet if you circle back round almost immediately after we finish doing this session, it should be available to rewatch. So if you aren't following along, if you want to follow along at a later time, or you want to double back and think, wait, what the hell was Phil talking about? Then you're welcome to do that. If whilst we're doing it, you have a question, you're like, wait, that doesn't quite make sense, I'm not quite sure, you skip something, or I just assumed that you know something, then just ask and I'll see if I can pick that up. So anyway, we've got something that looks like this. I'm just going to click OK. There's someone at the door. That's great, I forgot that that was on. 1 sec. There we go. Now it's not. I've got staff all open the door for me. I don't have to worry about that. So what I'm going to do now, whilst I've got this frame, I've got the copy here, layer 1 with a white on. I'm actually going to merge those two layers together. So click on the top layer and click Control E. I'm going to call that frame for transform. This is going to make sense later on. Okay, it's not useful now, it's going to make sense later on. I'm going to click Control S so we can save this. Now I need to save this as a frame for transform 2 as a PSD file. It has to be a PSD file. Now originally when I started doing this, you could just save it as a JPEG, but I realized that in order to do the bit that we're going to do later on, it has to be a PSD because that's how it brings the file in. So just have to save it as a PSD file. Save, good, happy. We're done with that now, actually don't need it. I'm going to go onto the frame and we're going to make this look nice and three-dimensional. And we're going to use the same thing at the bottom of the layers panel that says FX. But instead of selecting inner shadow, we're going to select this one at the top which says Bevel and Emboss. It's got the default settings from when I did this earlier today, so it actually looks pretty good already. But normally when you open it up, it's going to look something like this. So it's a very sort of shallow effect. It looks like it's just a piece of rounded MDF or cardboard or something. So we need to make sure that it's set to inner bevel, technique smooth. And by adjusting these, so I want the size to be larger so that it reflects the fact that it's like a curved three-dimensional organic shape. And by increasing the depth, it adjusts whether it's this sort of very hench, sort of macho, like faceted surface or very curved, sort of rounded surface. And by adjusting where this little light setting is, you can control whether it looks lit like this or quite flat in terms of the shading. That one looks nice, doesn't it? Wow, look at that. Quite like that. So what I want is I want one that looks quite glossy, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this surface look like it is manufactured from a sort of like a carbon fiber kind of material. So I'm going to find the right sort of balance for this. And this is one of these things where it's only really by sort of juggling around the settings and getting some experience using it that you'll get the right kind of feeling for it. That one's about right. I'm going to agonize too much over this, but it's got quite a nice kind of like horizon illusion across this top bar just here and down here. It's got a reasonably sharp sort of specular highlight, so it looks glossy. So the sharper the transition between light and dark on a surface, the more sort of glossy and reflective it looks. I'm going to click OK. Now, because this is a layer style, and layer effect, it's still live just here, so we can turn that on and off. I want it turned on, obviously. So it looks really nice. I'm happy with this. I'm going to click Control-Shift-S. I'm going to save the document. Control-S would just save it and it would overwrite the one that we saved earlier. I don't want to do that. I want to save a copy. So Control-Shift-S lets us save a copy of the document. So I'm going to save it as frame frame 3DP, yeah. Charlie on YouTube said, Coventry, I bought a TR7 years ago, what an awful thing, but loved it when it ran. Weird connection is that obviously TR7 is a vintage sports car from Triumph, which was manufactured in Coventry. Triumph now doesn't exist as a car manufacturer, but it's based in Hinckley, which is quite near, which is the factory plant where they make Triumph motorbikes, which is the form that that company is in now. And I learned how to do almost everything that I know how to do on the software from my dad, who is a technical illustrator for Triumph. So I've done a stack of commercial work for Triumph, which is, there you go, there's a weird little connection there across the seas for you, Charlie. So we've got this thing just here, it looks okay. Let's just, I'm going to go onto the bike layer just here. I want to get rid of the frame, so I can either make just a new layer and put cover up on. I'm going to use the brush, Alt to pick up the colour here, hold down Alt and it goes into this mode to collect the colour. 100% hardness, 100% opacity on the brush, which you get by clicking 0 on the keyboard. And I'm just going to literally paint over, and what that's going to do is it's just going to kill the frame where it's going to look a bit weird or confusing fighting against our frame. So I'll deal with this bit later on, if at all, but we've got the majority of it sorted out. I just can't leave it. Okay, so that would be good enough for rock and roll, I reckon. If this was a full commercial project, I would be a little bit more circumspect, a little bit more careful about that. But just for today, I think we can survive without having it look absolutely perfect. Fix it later on if I feel the need to. So we've got our frame. But what I want to do now is I want to put a material over it, a texture over the top of it. So I'm a big fan of making sure that we've got like a nice texture over the top. So I'm going to go into Bing again. I'm going to find a carbon fiber texture. Now, carbon fiber weave, there we go. We searched that earlier and it worked for the one we were looking at before. What you want is one that's reasonably high resolution, but we're actually going to make a seamless texture out of this. So this one's plenty fine. Let me just refresh. That's annoying. We'll paste that directly into Photoshop. Now obviously, it's a kind of weird combination of that square is too small and the weave for the carbon fiber is too big. So I'm going to set this to overlay, Remember, overlay is the perfect way to put textures over the top of artwork that you've already created, because it inherits sort of the light and dark from the texture underneath. So we can see how it looks in terms of the texture over the top of the frame, but it's obviously too big in terms of the actual size of the weave. So I'm going to scale that down until I think it's the right realistic kind of size for how this carbon fibre weave would be. And then I'm going to set it back to normal. And let me just sharpen it a little bit. And sharpen it will just make it pop a little bit since we've scaled it down. Yeah, that looks better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select an area of this that is going to tile perfectly. So rather than sort of copying and pasting this again and again, I'm going to teach Photoshop how to use this as a pattern. So if you can imagine that it's a little bit like a chessboard. So if you were going to reduce a chessboard down into its smallest tiling component, it would be like white, black, black, white. Because if you just had the white square, it would tile forever as white. If you just had the black square, it would tile forever as black. If you just had a white and a black square, then it would tile as white and black stripes horizontally, and so on and so forth. So on the screen just here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, so I've zoomed right in so you can see the pixel grid. Way too close, but it's fine. I'm going to select the black box and then the white box. And I've come down to the same point. So we've started at the black box, so we stop at the start of the next black box, and then we're going to do the same horizontally, like this. So we've got basically this pixel here is the same position in the pattern as this pixel here. This pixel here is the same pixel as this one here. Man, I hope this makes sense. This is a bit weird, but the idea is that that little tiny grid, when it repeats, will simulate the entire pattern. So what I can do is, with that selected, I'm going to go to Edit, Define Pattern. I'm going to call it Carbon PM because it's the afternoon and I've already done this morning. And it gives you a little preview of what just that texture looks like. I'm going to click OK. So now, if I go to Edit, Fill, I can select Pattern. So yours might just say foreground color. I can select Pattern. I can go into the drop down just here, and there it is. There's the little grid that I just saved. So I click on that, click OK, and it fills the entire artboard with that pattern. And so you can see that each individual component of it is just that little bit that we just selected. But now it fills the entire artboard and would do for any size. So we've made sure that the scale of the pattern is exactly right for the texture, for the background, so it's going to work. And now we know that it's going to cover the entire thing. So I'm going to click Normal here and set it to Overlay. And so now it covers the entire bike, the frame, and we've got that nice glossy shape of the geometry, and we've got the pattern over the top. But firstly, the pattern covers everything, including the wheels and all of the handlebars and everything. That's easy enough to fix. But it also is very regimented as a pattern. It's like I said, it's like a chessboard, so it's all dead straight lines. Whereas the frame is this sort of super soft, organic look. So what we need to do is make the texture conform to the shape. Now, if you guys, for fourth years, would have seen me do these tutorials, and you probably would have seen me do on the YouTube channel, where you get a texture and use the warp tool to distort it over the top. The problem with this is, we could do that and we could bodge it a bit, but it's just too complicated a shape to be able to do that. But now there's a nice way of doing this in Photoshop that's a bit of a hack. It's like an old school hack, but it gets a really nice effect. So in order to do this, what we've got to do is go to Filter, Filter Gallery, Now I've already got it selected, which is a little bit annoying. So what you want to do is click on Distort Glass. Now by default, it will give you frosted. And it will look something like this, okay? So if you were to follow this along, this is what it would look like. And it kind of simulates if you were looking through a piece of frosted glass. It distorts the image using a like an alpha channel that you can't see. Now what I want to do is I want to load in that bike frame that we saved earlier on, and that's going to let us use this tool to distort the carbon fiber texture. And in order to do that, rather than clicking on frosted or canvas or blocks like this, I'm going to click on this little drop down to the side of where it says that texture blocks. This drop down here, it says load texture, so I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to load up frame for transform 2, which is the one that we did earlier on, and it brings in this thing that we had earlier. Reduce this down, and it kind of is like the, you know, the Predator from the movie Predator, that it uses that shape that we created earlier as a guide of how to distort it. So what we're looking at here is the middle section is flat, and then as it goes towards the dark, the black of that pattern, of that shape that we saved, it compresses the darker it gets. So the darker it gets, the more compressed it is. And so we can simulate looking at, if you're a cylindrical shape, the center section, the pattern's going to be more or less undistorted, and then as it drops away to the edge, it just becomes more and more visually compressed to simulate it going around the corner. So what I'm going to do is increase the distortion, making sure that the smoothness is set to maximum. So sometimes this takes a couple of goes just to get it dead right. I click OK with that. I reckon that has worked pretty nicely. You can see here on this shape just here, it's got a bit bulbous. The pattern is super condensed just here as it drops away towards the over the edge. As it comes round, it becomes flatter. The pattern is dead straight, and then as it drops away again, it becomes compressed just there. And so these cylindrical sections, it's all sort of super compressed down to feel like a cylinder. The same with this. And then as it comes out into this section just here, the pattern expands. Yep, I reckon that has worked pretty well. So like I said, it's a bit of a hack. I mean, but you get a really nice effect at the end of it. So with just using sort of like automated features in the software, without having to ever paint anything or really draw anything, we've got this lovely, very glossy surface that has a feeling of three-dimensional depth, and we've got this sort of almost uncanny distortion of the surface over the top that makes it very compellingly believable as a real three-dimensional object. So let me just reduce down the colour of that because it looks a little bit bold for carbon fibre. Usually carbon fibre is going to be a little bit darker like this, so quite like a nice dark carbon fibre pattern. Nice, nice. I'm happy with that. It's looking pretty good. So we've got a beautiful effect, and what I'm going to do is, if I just Control on the keyboard, hold down Control, as I hover over the thumbnail for the frame, you'll see that a little marquee appears next to the cursor, the dotted lines. If I click on that, it kind of picks up the transparency for that layer as a marquee, as a selection. So now on the carbon fiber texture layer, if I click on this bit just here, then it creates a layer mask based on that selection. which means that it masks out everything that isn't the texture. So we've got the layer just there. So it all looks pretty good. Now, what I want to do is I want to mask both of those simultaneously. So I want to apply a mask that lets me see the sprocket, the gear, and some of the other features on the bike, but it doesn't affect the layer effect. So in order to do that, then I need to put them both into a folder. So I select carbon texture, hold down shift and click on the frame, and then hit this button at the bottom of the panel which says create a new group. So that puts them both into this group here, which I'm going to rename frame hole. I'm going to apply a layer mask to that. So basically what happens now with this layer mask is anything that's black on the layer mask, so if I painted black on the layer mask, it hides from that folder. Okay? So what I want to do is select all the bits that would be visible. So click on the bike. I'm going to use this tool here. It doesn't always work. It's a bit of a crappy tool sometimes. So we'll have to see how well this works. Right, hold on. So if I paint inside this selection now, you can see most of it seems, yeah, it's kind of worked. It's kind of worked. Like I said, it's not a great selection tool. I will just go in and fix a couple of bits manually now. But it's one of those things where it's a good start to a process rather than just leaping straight in and doing everything manually. It's done most of it. So I'll just fix this. There's very few tools out there that are better than manually masking something. So if this was a full commercial project and someone was paying me a stack to do it, I probably would just go in with a pen tool and spend 10 minutes making sure that this mask was perfect with the pen tool. But as it is, it's fine. It looks like we've got a bit of a problem with the stream. So if there's any issue at your end, could you just write a note down? This is the first day that we've used this system. So if you can't quite see what's going on, then do let me know. One of the things that I can do is I can select the yellow on the artwork and desaturate it, which is going to de-halo a lot of this sprocket just here at the bottom. Okay. So I think that's worked quite nicely. We've got this very smooth organic shape. We can still see what the frame would look like if we just popped it out from the background. And we could always hide that that layer. Okay. That's strange. Okay. Cool. Anyway, I was just asking a question there. So, all right, that's done. Now, what we've just done in terms of the texture for the bike is fine. It looks okay, it looks good. I think that's a really nice effect. I'm going to click Control S on that because it's so beautiful. But what if you want to create a pattern like we did for the carbon fibre, but we wanted to make sure that it tiled properly, but it was not a repeating pattern. So there are some patterns that are like, if you had concrete, for example. So carbon fibre is obviously a logically repeating pattern, but if you had a piece of concrete or something similar to that, there's no repeat for it, so it's not going to necessarily just by default be possible to tile. So I'm going to show you how to create a tiling pattern that will always tile, and this is a technique that's actually very useful for not just creating stuff in Photoshop, but I know that the students, if you guys are ever creating something that you need to render out from like Rhino or Keyshot, and you need to put a texture on it, and it's a texture you don't have, this is a way that a lot of 3D artists will create that texture. So again, I'm going to jump onto Bing. Where are we? Here we go. And I'm going to put in we had polystyrene texture earlier on. Polystyrene texture. Let's make sure that we've got one that's quite large. That one works. That one works okay. Actually, no, how? This one? No. Okay, this one here looks okay. Styrofoam texture. Yeah, that's good. So I'm going to copy this image, paste it in here. Obviously, it's the wrong size. So again, I'm just going to just desaturate it a little bit. And adjust the colour. So I was going to pop that over the top here and set it to overlay. Just hide the carbon fibre texture. It's obviously too big. Just pull that size down. And now it's too small. So in order to make this a tiling texture, I'm going to select it like this. Go to File, New, and have to start a new file for this to go into, which obviously is quite small. Now you can see that this isn't going to tile properly because it's not a repeating pattern. So if I were to put the join in the middle like this, so what I did then was hold down Shift and dragged it across. Hold Alt and Shift and drag it the other way. So now we've got the seam is in the middle, and you can see that there is a seam there. It's kind of clunky. It's not mega pronounced. It might be that this would have tiled okay, but there's still like a hard line just here. So I'm going to flatten those two layers down to one layer, and I'm going to use the clone tool to fix this. Now the clone stamp tool is a really nice tool in Photoshop that lets you paint, but it lets you paint using a different section of the image. So if I was to hold down the Alt key and click just here, you can see that there's a little hair. Now it will paint, but it paints using that section of the image where I originally clicked. And so by using, say, a soft edged brush and looking at the way that the texture works, you can kind of eliminate that that central hard line. So now what we've got, because there's no hard line in the middle, let me crop this down. Because there's no hard line in the middle, there's no tiling problem, because of the way that the image works, this bit just here was this left-hand section of the center, and this bit just here was the right-hand section of the center, which means that these two side bits, if you were to transpose them back, would match perfectly. So this texture would now tile perfectly horizontally. But it wouldn't tile perfectly vertically because we've not eliminated the vertical seam yet. So again, I'm going to hold down Shift. Hold down Shift and drag down so that that line is in the middle. Hold down Alt and Shift and drag up. And you can see now that we've got the seam, the vertical seam is in the middle of the page. So just by using the same tool again, this tool on the left-hand side that looks like a rubber stamp, the clone stamp tool, I can pick up, flatten the layers down, pick up the art from just here, and just paint straight over that central seam. So you can see now that there's no vertical line, there's no horizontal line across it. This texture will now tile seamlessly. So often you can find a texture if you just go on Google or Bing and do an image search for like seamless polystyrene texture. But often you'll be using, there might be a material or something that you've got a physical sample of that doesn't necessarily exist on an archive, and you want to make sure that it is exactly right. The other smart thing about this is sometimes if you need to make a CAD model of an object you physically have, you can photograph that object, extract the textures like this, and then make a repeating version of that texture so that you can then seamlessly tile that surface using the actual texture. It can be really effective. So if you were going to save, you should save this now just as a high resolution JPEG, and you could then import that into your CAD software. But I'm going to create a pattern in the same way as before. I've clicked Control A so it selects the entire artboard of this file. Edit, define pattern, poly PM. And so now I'm on this polystyrene layer. Can I remember how to spell polystyrene? Yeah, that's good enough. I can click Image, Fill, defaults to pattern because I used it before. Instead of that, I can click on this polystyrene texture. When I click OK, it now creates a seamless tiling version of that texture. Now, because of how Photoshop works, because it has got some variation in it, your eye is brilliant at picking up on patterns, so there is a repeating pattern there. You can see this kind of like dark swoosh just here, but what there's not is any individual seams. So when you get up close, you can't see that repeating pattern. And usually when you use a texture like this, that repeating pattern will become invisible. So I'm going to click Overlay, pick up the transparency from the layer, create a mask using it, drag that into that folder so that it inherits the masking from that. And now we've got, let's face it, slightly ridiculous polystyrene bike frame. Let me just add a sharpen to it so that it pops a bit more. Now it may be that that's a bit silly for what you want, But at the same time, sometimes it's worth visualizing these things. And it may be that you're in a situation where someone's like, what would it look like if? And you can very quickly get an idea of exactly what it would look like if. Let me just fix this. So that's how I would do it. That's how you will create a seamless pattern from any texture, and it could be anything. It works with anything, and that is the way of doing it. So if you see anybody using seamless patterns, if you do Google seamless aluminium texture or something like that, that's how they've done it, because that's the way to do it. There may be some other application that exists that does it in some other way, but as far as I'm concerned, that's the way. So I feel like we've kind of whistled through this today. We've covered quite a few little bits and pieces. The session that I did this morning was about twice as long, and we did more or less the same kind of stuff, but with, I guess, 50% more waffle. The texture approach, obviously, if you've watched the rest of the tutorials, you know that if you use overlay for textures, then you will always get sort of a nice effect over the top. I'm a big fan of using photographic textures. Previously, when I've used textures in the tutorials, I've always used a very large texture that's just big enough to do the job by itself. And it's easy enough to do that now because we can select very high resolution textures using Bing or Google or whatever. Or, better yet, take the photographs yourself. But often this will be a better way to do it because you want a repeating texture or something that's going to be smaller in terms of what the detail is, but it needs to be bigger so that it covers the entire object. So knowing how to do this is a very powerful technique, and the idea that you can define those patterns is very strong. But I talk to the students quite a lot about how the longer you work for, basically the better you get at what you're doing. And it's not just because you have an increasing level of experience, but your toolkit gets progressively bigger and bigger and bigger. So for example, if I was going to make a carbon fiber texture, because I've had to do this so many times, I've got about 3 or 4 different carbon fiber textures that are ready made. So I wouldn't have to go online and find them because I've got a swipe file which already contains those things. So once you've made a texture like this, the polystyrene texture or the carbon fiber texture, you've now got it. You don't need to do that again. You've got that texture. So what you can do is the next time you think about doing something which has got carbon fiber, it's so much easier, and it's easier for you to reach out and take that idea because you know that you're going to be able to very quickly and easily do it. So once you've built up a bunch of different things like this, a bunch of different resources, they become more and more sort of accessible because you'll be able to use them sort of again and again. This technique with the way that we've rendered the frame, we could have just used the airbrush. We've used all kind of airbrushing techniques in the past, and it's very easy to do. We could go through. But where this comes into its own, where it's very strong, is if you can imagine that we wanted to come up with, we've got like 5 or 6 variations for the frame that we want to visually explore. We want to see, I wonder what it would look like, each one of those, which one the strongest one is. The way that I would do that would be to take this document, lay the bike 4 or 5 times up on the page, so we end up with a very big document. On a single path set, draw all of the frames. So draw the frame for this bike, draw the frame for this bike, frame for this bike, frame for this bike, frame for this bike, frame for this bike. Then on a single layer, you fill them with the grey, the same way that we have with this. And because everything is automated, the effects, the layer effects for this, adding this glossy surface, will, when you apply them, apply to all of those bikes. When you've made a layer which has got a texture that will fill the layer because it's a tiling texture, it will put that texture over all of the bikes. And so you very quickly, in the same amount of time that it's taken us to visualize just one bike, will be able to visualize all of your bikes, 5 or 6 different bikes, or however many frames you want to do. So working out ways where you can automate things like this, and you can use some of the features of Photoshop to kind of like trick to create these visuals, can be quite a strong way to very quickly create this kind of render. I was explaining earlier on today that when you create a render like this, Now we're doing this in isolation, so you, if you're sitting at home and you're like, oh, I reckon I can do that in Photoshop, you should be able to follow this along because each individual bit is fairly simple. But the goal for it, for you, would be just that you end up with a peng looking drawing. It looks really nice and you can, yeah, like I did that. But when you're working in a commercial setting, this drawing, you don't have time to be like, I'll just sit down and just draw a dope drawing of a bike frame. It would exist for a very specific purpose. And it is not just that we need a photographic looking picture of this bike frame. It would be that you were going from concept to production, for example, and you wanted to get you know, like a business stakeholder inside the company or somebody who's a purchaser who needs to invest to be able to see and understand in a more immediate way what it is that you're talking about. So you might be able to look at a DWG file that explains how something's going to be physically produced and visualize what it looks like, but you need to produce a document like this which visually translates it for somebody who can't read those kind of documents in the same way. So it doesn't necessarily have to look photographic, but what it has to do is to communicate the physicality of an object for somebody who doesn't necessarily have as good a visual imagination as you. And a lot of the time when you're producing product design visualizations like this, that's your goal, is that you've got to tell the story of what shape the object is and what it does and what it looks like for somebody who doesn't have a visual imagination. Now, you wouldn't be here watching this, you wouldn't be studying product design, you wouldn't be looking at how to do this kind of concept art or communicating visuals like this if you didn't have a good visual imagination. But let me tell you this, when you go out into the world and you start dealing with clients, you will be very surprised. Every now and again, you will deal with someone who clearly, in the same way that some people can't hear music because they're tone deaf, they just can't process it, or they can't clap along with a drum beat, they will look at pictures and they won't understand them. They won't know that they don't understand them. They don't know that they lack that particular gene for having visual imagination or whatever, or perhaps they've not got the cultural experience. But you will hit these people who don't have that kind of, like I say, visual imagination. And your job is to use your technical skill in drawing, in being able to use software like this, in using CAD to create images that exist to sort of solve that problem for them. So there's no ambiguity. They can look at it and go, oh, I get it. So that's what this would be for, is just bear in mind that it's not necessarily just to look pretty, that when you do something like this, that it's an artifact with a very specific purpose. And if you bear that in mind, then hopefully it will make life slightly easier for you in terms of producing it. So I'm going to wrap that up. I don't know if anybody's been following along. We've had smaller views today, this afternoon, than we did this morning. If you want, like Charlie was asking, is this going to be recorded? As soon as we finish doing this, if you just rewind to the beginning, you'll be able to click play and watch all of this again. I have no idea why you would want to do that. Perhaps you're a masochist in some way. There's also another video that I've done today, which is basically just this exact same thing, except I call other people's names out when they're explaining things during the thing. And we end up with a bike that looks ever so slightly different. We cover both techniques, all the techniques in both of those. This idea about working with the paths, always something that we come back to. The way that we've constructed the layers, the way that we've done the masking, the way that we've done the textures. These are all things that exist not just in terms of being able to produce a bike image like this, but that are useful across the spectrum. Now, if you're not watching this live, and I suspect most people who see this aren't going to be watching this live, and you have no idea what the heck I'm going on about, you can leave a message on the YouTube chat, or in the comments on the YouTube actually, because the chat's off to the side somewhere, and the comments are down here. I'll be able to check the comments. They're going to ping every time somebody leaves one. So if you have a question about this, and you want to know what the heck I'm going on about, ask in there, and hopefully I'll be able to help you out with that. If you're one of my students, then you can contact me through the Discord, because we've set this Discord channel up. You can contact me through the Product Design Finalist 2020 group, where I originally posted this. And you guys also, my email address is in there. You should know my email address as well, because I keep trying to give it out to people in case they need help, because I want to provide as much support as possible. And if you have any questions regarding not just how to do, where's my finger pointing? The bike, but also anything to do with Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, or any two-dimensional presentation stuff, then I can help you out with that. I'm not on site now. And I think realistically, increasingly, you're not going to be on site either. And I think probably, listen, I have no idea what the university is going to do. I'm not a main staff member. They don't tell me anything. But this is a new way that we're going to be looking at working. And I think once people get their head around the fact that it works quite nicely, then we're going to have to use these channels that we've got to maintain communication. So keep in touch. If you've got any questions, use one of those channels through. Students, you know how to get hold of me through all of the easy channels. People who aren't my students, then I just ask in the YouTube and I'll see what I can to help out. If there's something that you want to know that isn't covered in any of the tutorials, I will be doing more of these tutorials. I will be increasingly doing, because I'm supposed to be in the university teaching and I'm not on site, I'm going to be doing lives like this. And I want to make it as useful as possible for you. So if you want to leave a comment in the Discord, on the Facebook, if you want to email me, if you want to go on YouTube and leave a comment that says, hey, wouldn't it be useful to know this? If you want to know how to do it, the chances are someone else is going to want to know how to do it. So I'll do everything that I can to produce a stream like this that's going to be useful to as many people as possible. So with that in mind, I really hope that you guys stay safe. Charlie, you're more than welcome. Thank you for stopping in. I hope you have a wonderful day. And I will see you guys at some point soon. Stay safe. I've no idea where the button that ends the stream is. I had that big finale and you guys were like, wow, he's really finished now. I found it now. It's up at the top. It's red. Right. Stay safe. Still stay safe. Have a great day.